Cool. Nice. Hello, everyone. Like, there's not much of you left, honestly, but I kind of understand that. Like, I know that you're all quite exhausted at this stage. And, like, first of all, thank you for being here, for staying, for, like, being eager to learn till the last moment. And believe me, it's also not easy for me to be here speaking at the last person. Based on some studies, actually a lot of studies, like people usually remember the last moments of their experience as the defining ones. So basically the whole weight of like, if you had of your whole experience is on my shoulders. And if the tickets won't sell next year, it's kind of on me. So like, and honestly, I'm not surprised that half of the people left. Like, the previous talk was very good, and I would just cut at this stage, like it was good. Let's leave. Anyway. Let's start with a quick vibe check. Like, which Alex are you? So we have a happy Alex and we have a grumpy Alex. So raise your hand if you're a happy Alex. Nice, nice. There are so many happy Alexes in here. Okay, so raise your hand if you're a grumpy Alex. There are a few grumpy Alexes. Good. Well, I cannot do much for the grumpy Alex. I hope I will cheer you up a little bit. But if you want this sticker, by the way, like there will be Alex Lichter waiting here. Like Alex, yes, and he has a full bag of those stickers. And those who left, they just won't know this. Like they are super exclusive. Like there won't be such stickers next year. So this is kind of like your prize for staying with me. But please don't leave. So first of all, again, like it's late. Your brains, they must be fried already. So I promise this talk will be super chilled, like the guy here on the screen. And I won't be introducing any like hard to understand concepts. But I also promise that in the end, you will actually know things that will be helpful. So while still have your attention with this lovely image, I want to start by actually explaining why I think this knowledge that I will be talking about, like e-commerce, is relevant to all of you. Like, probably the people who has left, they are not interested in e-commerce, but actually, they should, even if they won't work on the e-commerce project. I don't know if you're aware, but actually there's an enormous number of e-commerce websites being created every year. In the last 4 years, it almost tripled. And in 2021, which was the COVID time, pandemic, the number of e-commerce sites in the world has doubled. So there was like 204%. And of course, like we all know why. There's absolutely nothing else to do than just ordering things online. The companies who didn't have an e-commerce website, well, they were in very bad situation. So it's safe to say that almost every web developer in our industry really like at some point of their career will have built some sort of an e-commerce website. And while in essence e-commerce websites are built with more or less the same tools and technologies like Nuxt, PHP, whatever, and they follow the same rules as other websites, the industry has developed a certain patterns around them to solve problems that are very common just to the e-commerce shops, and like they're happening all the time, really. So in today's talk, I want to share with you the essence of what I've learned in the last 8 years in e-commerce. And the 8 years is a lot in the tech scene, believe me. Like, I witnessed a lot of changes. So when the time comes for you to build your own storefront, you know how to approach it, and you know how to make the project successful. You know how not to fail it. And unfortunately, most of the projects in general in the world fails. And if by any chance you will never encounter those challenges of building e-commerce storefront, which is rare, really, it is super rare. You may encounter problems that we are solving in the e-commerce applications while building something that is not an e-commerce application. So the first thing I want to share with you is how I personally fell in love with like building API-first e-commerces website, and what problems were solved just by moving out of the monolith to the API-first approach, which with Nuxt and all of those things. And honestly, I don't think you will be actually building something like a monolith. We are at Vuejs Amsterdam, but you have bosses, and sometimes it's good to convince your boss to do something that you want. So when I started my journey as a freelancer, and it was like more than 10 years ago, I chose the same path as most of the freelancers at that time. And can someone tell me like what is the software that was mostly used by freelancers at that time? Dreamweaver? Oh, yeah, Dreamweaver actually, yeah. I was the front-end page guy, but yeah. PHP is a good answer to some degree, but it is WordPress. Really, it was so easy to build things with it compared to just coding them from scratch. Obviously, like I loved coding from scratch, but I also had to make money. You had almost endless amount of plugins. You had themes. You have like a WYSIWYG builders, and as many of you know, WordPress has an e-commerce plugin called WooCommerce that was released in 2011, I think. And it was already quite popular around 2013 when I started doing e-commerce projects. And this is how I entered the e-commerce world, by using WordPress. And after many years of doing that, I got terribly bored, really. Like every project was a copy-paste of the previous one. Like that was cool because you could basically complete things that used to take like 3 months in a week. And then you can tell your customer that, oh, like, you know, it took me even longer, but here you are, like the price is the same. So I got a little bit bored, and I started looking for bigger, more challenging projects. And I knew that getting them as a freelancer is quite tough because like selling as a freelancer is a tough job. And I joined the software house in my city as a front-end developer. And there I started working with Magento, one of the biggest e-commerce platforms built on PHP. So I assume that some of you here who stayed actually know e-commerce. So how many of you has worked with Magento? Keep your hands. How many of you liked it? Yeah. Magento at that time it was very well known from its open source roots and like the huge international community. And at that time, there were very little successful open source projects in the e-commerce space that actually was able to serve e-commerce customers. So I kind of had no choice, right? And building Magento frontend was all like PHP with a sprinkle of jQuery and some other very ancient JavaScript frameworks like Prototype.js. And I'm quite sure, like, from those who haven't raised their hands, like, have you ever heard about Prototype.js? There are 2 people. It is quite ancient, really. And there was really nothing exciting for a front-end developer back then. But it wasn't a problem exclusive to the e-commerce space. And unfortunately, this is how the enterprise segment looks like in general right now. Majority of big applications at that time looked like this, like PHP, some absolutely ancient front-end technologies, like no one cared about the front-end. They were not even hiring front-end developers, like PHP dev can write HTML, right? So I started complaining a little bit to my manager, and a year later, I was moved to a different project. That was an in-house product built with AngularJS, and honestly, that changed absolutely everything. Instead of having to deal with like PHP code, jQuery, Prototype.js, I was only dealing with like the front-end piece and you know the hottest at that time JavaScript technologies, which was AngularJS. I never ever touched PHP. Like the only thing that I cared about was APIs, and that was all I needed. And you know, despite having to deal with a completely new framework and completely new approach, this really accelerated my work. And also allowed me to really focus on the part that I loved, that I was expert at. While the other team, the one in the basement, was focusing on the backend piece. So you would say like perfect harmony. So compared to my previous experience with PHP e-commerce platforms, it was like a whole new level of joy from my work. And the code base was much smaller, so it was much easier to understand it, to onboard new people. Communication with the backend was based on the RESTful APIs. So it was very elegant. And also SPA concept, it was revolutionary. Angular made so many frustrating things that were really hard to achieve even with jQuery, which is amazing, obviously. Just, you know, a walk in the park and enjoyable. So together with my front-end co-workers who were front-end developers working in Magento, doing the same miserable job as I was doing before, we started to wonder if we actually could have the same experience as we had with that application, but in the e-commerce world. That would be cool, right? We can still do e-commerce because we actually liked e-commerce. Like there's a lot of interesting problems in there. But we really didn't like Prototype.js and PHP. So we knew that we don't know much about that actually. It was 2017, like no one did. Like headless e-commerce, it is kind of a new thing in general. Like 6 years is like ages in this industry. So we started by researching the available solutions. Obviously, AngularJS was on the table at that time. Angular 2 started to become a thing, and it was deeply like unstable. So we were just like, okay, that's not. There was React, and we actually started with React. And the thing about React is that it was hard, and we didn't like hard thing. So we chose Vue. And we chose Vue because of its simplicity. And we used it to build the first boilerplate using Magento APIs under the hood. And because we had absolutely no idea how to make this right, we decided, okay, let's put it on GitHub. So other people who have absolutely no idea how to make it right can contribute. And we won't be reviewing this because we have absolutely no idea how open source works either. And something cool could happen out of this. And well, this is how the first iteration of Storefront came out. And at that time, in the world of PHP, separating front-end from the back-end, it was quite an innovative idea and approach. And very quickly, we reached like more than 100 contributors from all around the world. It was crazy. Like we had hackathons where I was flying like every 2 weeks somewhere. There were like hackathons sometimes in New York, sometimes in France, like with 30, 40 people. We really felt like a celebrities. And that was 2017. And a lot has changed since then. There was also COVID. The concept of headless, it really evolved. It matured. Like right now, it's not just people who have absolutely no idea what they are doing. And Storefront also matured a lot. Like today, we are no longer a framework for Magento. Honestly, like I have a lot of respect to Magento community, but I hate Magento, so I'm really glad about that. And we are super backend agnostic. Like we support more than 10 e-commerce platforms, and we learned a lot since 2017. And we've seen a lot of successful and unsuccessful projects. It is hard to speak actually after so much time and drinking. So during this talk, I want to share with you some of the things I've learned in those last 8 years of doing e-commerce, almost exclusively with headless applications. And of course, this could be a day-long workshop. And I don't know, maybe someday I will host a day-long workshop. But to be honest, there are only a few things that are usually the cause of failed headless commerce projects. And from the technical standpoint, if you do them right, you should be fine. Like literally, like I've seen hundreds of projects, and the same things are always repeating. There could be some edge cases, but you'll be very good at dealing with them once you master the foundation. So let's start with like a common definition of headless. It sounds a little bit cruel, but a headless storefront is in its core just an application that is decoupling the presentation layer from the business logic layer. Of course, you could have some more layers underneath, but the goal is that we're communicating from the front, with the front end is communicating with the back end through APIs. In the world of modern JavaScript, this application, this presentation layer is almost always a meta framework like Nuxt, Next, Astro, Quick, maybe Solid Start as well. I'm not sure if Ryan is here, probably not, but he will be tomorrow. And why? Why actually a meta framework? Meta framework because SEO is absolutely crucial for e-commerce. There are some exceptions, like if you have a B2B application that has a login page, then like the technology really doesn't matter because those people, they're used to terrible experience. Like you can build it with everything. But for most of the e-commerce world, speed matters, but also SEO matters. So unless you want to do very custom stuff and like roll out your own SSR, which honestly doesn't make sense because all the tools are super cool and good, you're gonna use something like that. So at this stage, our project, our e-commerce project, state-of-the-art, beautiful, is just a simple Nuxt.js project that is using SSR. And it only grows from there. Because the next thing is UI. And the truth is, like most of the e-commerce front ends look super similar. Like everyone wants to differentiate, but at the same time, users are very used to certain ways of interacting with e-commerce. So there's not that much room of innovation. Like they're all built from exactly the same UI elements, like product cards, mini cards, product sliders. They're usually in exactly the same order, in exactly the same places, as you can see here. But if you Google like e-commerce product page, you'll see hundreds or thousands of exactly the same UIs. So using a UI library, it's kind of a good idea in here. You get a solid foundation, spend your time on basically adjusting things to how you want them to be, not like saying a groundwork, like dealing with accessibility, all of that stuff. So it's good to have like e-commerce related UI library for that, right? And like, this is exactly what we also thought at Vuejs Storefront. So 2 years after releasing the first version of it, we released our own UI library, which is called Storefront UI. I would say pretty descriptive. I'm quite proud of this name. And since 2019, I think, it was completely rewritten to Tailwind. And now also supports React and Quick. And what makes this, by the way, videos, that's cool, right? I haven't still figured out like how to make it to look like a real demo without looking like a video. but I've seen some people doing talks and basically doing hands-free live coding. So I will get there too. Anyway, what makes it unique is really that the components at Storefront UI, they are kind of not abstracted, but you have a direct access to the source code. So you literally copy and paste them into your project, and from there, you can customize literally any aspect of them. Like based on my experience, it's much, much better to accelerate the UI than basically shipping components that are a black box. Because if something breaks in the black box, you need to wait for an update. And if you update this, like half of your UI is breaking. And also it's not very customizable. Like it's generally a bad idea from my perspective to have UI libraries that are shipped as a black box. And this is where Tailwind really shines. Though copy-pasting just a raw source code, it can be a little bit frustrating in the real world, right? Imagine that every time you copy like a large component, you need to extract all the like atomic components like buttons, chevrons, selects, etc. out of this. It is super frustrating. So to really make this copy-paste experience as good as possible, and while you will be making your own UI libraries, you can do exactly the same, we ship such small components in the package. So they are imported. And the large ones really work as a copy-paste because of that. And in addition, we also ship composables for interactivity that can also be used to build some other components. They're kind of universal. Because Storefront UI is a baseline, because as we just learned, like all e-commerce websites are different, right? And it is completely free. It is open source. We have a Nuxt module that makes the installation super easy, so you can just go to the docs, storefrontui.io, check the docs, check if you like it or not, and just use it. And if you have a simple storefront that connects to only 2 or 3 APIs, the UI library is really everything you need at this stage. If you want to really make it super efficient and you like those tiny optimizations, you can probably save some kilobytes of the JavaScript SDKs of like Storyblock or Shopify by fetching the data on the server side in the Nuxt API routes. And I think this is quite a common practice these days to do it that way, because the front end should be only for the UI and as lightweight as possible, really, which honestly like is hard for most of the people. And that's really all you need for a small project. Don't let anyone tell you that you need more, that you need like a API gateway for scalability or whatever. You don't, really. And probably if you have built a very small store, there is a very small chance it will grow so fast to a large one. I mean, if it's your business, I would really love your business to grow that fast, but the reality is it probably won't. Though, what if you are building something bigger? What if you work for an enterprise customer? This is where actually things like speed and scalability start to matter. And that's basically the only scenario when you should think about speed and scalability. Otherwise, it's like a premature optimization. And the first challenge you will face is handling bigger traffic. So if you don't want your success or success of your customer to be directly associated with a linear growth of their infrastructure costs, and also linear decrease of the performance and the reliability of the application, you're probably going to invest into caching. But you see, modern e-commerce applications has a lot of session-specific personalized content that should not be cached. At best case scenario, it's like user profile, cart, maybe that's it. In worst case scenario, almost all the content is personalized for the user, and we have a CMS that is basically driving the whole structure of the application. Like they're collecting everything from you. They know your age, they know your preferences, they know, how your girlfriend is named. Like they know everything, really. So that's the worst case scenario. And to make caching effective, you really cannot cache the session-specific content, because otherwise what happens is that the session-specific content is being cached and then served to all the users. So if you are Mike, and if this first request is being cached for Mike, like all of the users are Mike. And all of the users are seeing personalized products for Mike, and that might even be not safe for work. So by the way, I wrote quite a long article on that topic, like how to do caching properly. You can take a photo and Google it. Today there will be like the essence of that. So the first thing you need to do is making sure that your session-specific content is rendered only on the client side. Therefore, it is not cached. And Nuxt comes with 2 great features for that. So let's see first how we can deal with the session-specific markup in the code. with Nuxt. So when you have a session-specific elements in your code, like, again, the best way is just not to render them. So the cached version is agnostic. And if you want to do this with Nuxt, basically it has like a built-in feature called client-only component. And the client-only component, well, the name is, I think, pretty descriptive. It renders things only on the client. So if you wrap all the session-specific elements with this component, half of your work is done. Though this could unfortunately lead to some issues with layout shifts. And cumulative layout shift is like a core vital metric, which is actually impacting SEO, and probably your customer will be judging your work based on this particular metric. So to avoid the layout shifts and to also deliver better experience, because that's what we want, right? We're doing this for the reason. It's a good practice to actually render placeholders on the server, so your users know that they should expect something in that place to render, to appear. And this way you'll also not have layout shifts. And obviously Nuxt is not disappointing us here. So the client-only component, it is actually having a placeholder element. So whatever you put it there, it is actually rendered on the server, then it is being replaced with what is rendered on the client. Quite cool, right? And you know, like all the industry-leading applications are using that. I'm quite sure you know what the application is. It's the same with Facebook and all of the others. I mean, if you don't know what it is, you're quite lucky. But markup is not the only thing that we actually need to take care of, because another thing another session-specific thing that could land in our application, this HTML that is rendered, is actually the data itself. So you probably know, or you'll just learn, that Nuxt is saving the data rendered on the server side in the HTML. So you will see it at the very bottom of your application. So if you inspect the server-side rendered HTML, you'll see this at the bottom. And they're doing this because this data is being already fetched. So there's no point in fetching this the second time on the client. But this part has to be clean as well. And Nuxt is not disappointing us here as well, because useFetch has a built-in property called server that you can set to false. And it works pretty much like client-only component. You are fetching particular data only on the client side. And the very good way to actually test your SSR output and see if it's actually free of session data, so you can, for example, like log in and then refresh the page, and when you're refreshing the page, just disable JavaScript. So if a logged-in user, so something that was session-specific before, then is cached, and you don't have session-specific content, then everything is fine. Okay, but what about performance? If you ever saw me speaking at this conference and other conferences, I'm always talking about performance. And I haven't mentioned that yet. At the scale, speed really matters. Like large applications are also usually very complex, and they're very slow. And well, this is not driving revenue. And usually each of the APIs, it is consumed through some dedicated SDK. Each of those SDK is adding like a few dozen, really, or even a few hundred kilobytes to your bundle. So this way you can very quickly make your application clunky without even adding any kind of features. You just connect to different APIs through SDKs and it's already slow. Like from there it's just slower, and it's huge. Same with the business logic. You needed to federate, orchestrate, and transform data. Raise your hand if you know what is data federation. Orchestration? Okay, few people. Yeah, honestly, like these are quite new things. As like terms, but the reality is they are with us for a long time. So data federation is when we need to concatenate multiple APIs to get a full set of data. For example, you can fetch price and product name from the eCommerce, but take the product description from a CMS. We'll actually see how to do this in a moment. Data orchestration, on the other hand, is kind of like a workflow. So we need to perform like a set of actions to complete a certain interaction. On a checkout, it is very common that you are having to deal with data orchestration, like when you're placing an order, like you're making a call to the payment system. The payment system then connects to the eCommerce, etc., etc. Sometimes you could have like a lot of things under the hood. And like doing that on the front end is generally an anti-pattern, especially for the large applications. You're not only increasing your bundle size with the code and libraries for that, but also potentially increase the HTML rendered on the server with some kind of like irrelevant data, which then has to be stripped out, etc. Not to mention that if you need that to be available with more front ends, like mobile application, for example, you'll be duplicating your work. And if you ever work in a project that has a mobile application, you know that usually at the very early stages of the project, like these are becoming like completely separate apps. And then you have like product managers asking like, we need to unify this, like it has to ship the same features, but it never does. So when you deal with multiple APIs and like large amounts of data, it's best to delegate this task to a separate layer. So the front end is actually getting only the data that it needs. And this additional layer is usually called like API gateway, integration layer, orchestration layer, sometimes a middleware. And it gets the data from all the underlying APIs, transforms it, orchestrates it, federates it, like the front end doesn't care, and it just sends it to the front end. And now the front end only needs to talk to one API, and sometimes a much fewer endpoints. And we need usually to install only one SDK, or just sometimes we don't need to install any SDK, which makes the front end super lightweight. And at Vuejs Storefront, this layer is called, Vuejs Storefront Connect, which contains of middleware and SDK. And SDK is the front end part. And it's that simple to install. You literally need one file to create a middleware server. Then once the server is created, you create a middleware config file, which is basically the only file you need to work with. And when you want to add a new third-party integration, you just, add it to this file. And we have plenty of those available, by the way. Some are open source, some are not open source. And you simply add it under the integrations field, and that's it. And each integration is actually exposing methods like get product, get category, etc. And what middleware is doing, and it is quite cool, I think, it's automatically transferring those methods into endpoints. So you can now query everything from the front end, and responses will go through the middleware. And our middleware has a very friendly extensibility system that allows you to override existing methods or create new ones. So remember when I was telling that every method is basically a separate endpoint. So it is super handy for data federation and data orchestration. So for example, here what we are doing is basically we're taking the data from SAP Commerce and from Contentful. From SAP Commerce we're basically getting the product ID and maybe price somewhere, and from Contentful, we are getting the product descriptions. So this is exactly like this data federation example that I was giving before. And we are exposing this as get PDP endpoint. We also ship an SDK for the front end that allows you to very easily get fully typed responses from this middleware. And also it is allowing you to call it like a normal function, like a normal method within your application, which is kind of like an RPC. So in essence, the only things that you need to use Vuejs Storefront are those three files. On the front end, you need SDK config when you register like front end integrations on SDK, and then you are having a middleware. And middleware can also talk to like a React Native front end or whatever. It's just an API. And by the way, we have an open source boilerplate that has everything I've talked about today. It is baked like all together, and it is shipping along with the UI for the whole storefront that you're seeing here. So you can take it, you can install some integrations, you can create some integrations, and have this fully scalable e-commerce architecture for free. And if you are not building for enterprises, you can just take Storefront UI. So that would be it. Thank you so much, first of all, like for staying with me. Secondly, for just staying through the whole conference, because I think that was epic. And again, like the weight of this defining experiences on my shoulders. So, I won't finish it with this slide. I will finish it with a joke. So, why do Java developers wear glasses? Oh, how dare you. Yes, because they cannot see sharp. Thank you.